often than not, we fail in our effort to study history in order not to repeat past tragedies. The book was also written at a time when a particular era in the history of mankind might be coming to a close. The age of globalization could be approaching an end, or at the very least, globalization as we know it may be about to be transformed into something else. A devastating pandemic halted the trend of ever-increasing international travel that had been taking place in an uninterrupted fashion since 1945, and for a moment brought civilian air traffic back to a level where it had not been for 8 decades. At the same time, theorists of international relations described a future world which might to a greater extent be divided into separate political, cultural, and economic blocs. If this is indeed the case, this book is fittingly about the beginning of that period in history. Globalization can be traced back for centuries, but a world in which any inhabited place was within reach of any other inhabited place within usually no more than 24 hours, and in which the same cultural habits seem to be predominant, at least in the capitals and big cities, that world is very much the product of conditions created by World War II. I have written this book without making any value judgments about the merits and otherwise of globalization, and merely describing a fact of life that has set the general tone for the modern world over the past 3 or 4 generations. Given the subject at hand, it is inevitable that religion plays a prominent part in the following chapters. Most of the nations at war were cultures built on the Christian faith. To be sure, it was a secular age in a variety of ways, and science-based rationality was taking hold in many of the societies, while Germany was moving towards a new, strange kind of faith, seeking to gradually replace inherited liturgy with Germanic rituals. However, a basic set of Christian traditions lived on everywhere, fueled by the religious revival which many belligerent nations experienced, and Christmas was the most important of these. Many soldiers and sailors who took part in the war were intensely religious, or they became that way. As American military chaplain William Thomas Cummings reportedly said during the desperate battle for the Philippine peninsula of Bataan in 1942, "There are no atheists in the foxholes." In our more cynical and secular age, it is easy to shrug off such religious feelings. However, that also entails the historian's cardinal sin of failing to approach the past on its own terms. My attitude has been not to explicitly assume any position on the religious beliefs that emerge from the sources, but to describe them as faithfully and precisely as possible. More generally, I have decided to let the sources speak for themselves to the greatest extent possible. This means that even when the sources express views and opinions that will strike most readers as callous, unreasonable, or hypocritical, I have refrained from adding my personal comment. For example, when citing sources using derogatory terms typical of the age, such as Jap. Personally, as a reader, I prefer not to be told what to think, and I trust that many others feel the same way. An example of what this entails are the excerpts of German propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels' diary, which express great regret at his inability to spend more time with his 5 daughters and 1 son, entirely disregarding the many Jewish parents who could not see their children because they were dead. I believe that the readers are able to reach their own conclusions about Goebbels' inherently insensitive nature. It is in the nature of the subject, aiming to provide an account of the world and what took place in it within the span of 24 eventful hours, that the full story of the persons who appear on the broad global canvas cannot be told. They quickly emerge from the massive, anonymous flow of history, move briefly into sight, and then disappear again. This may leave some readers wanting to know more about what happened afterwards to the individuals who appear in this book. Therefore, I have added a list available in the print version of the book, briefly outlining their fates after Christmas 1942, to the extent that these are known. Such a list can easily become unwieldy and drown in biographical detail, and therefore I have limited myself to only the most basic information. In many cases, I have merely stated that a person survived the war. A few remarks on the rendering of foreign names, inevitable in a book spanning the entire globe. German names are given in the original spelling. For example, the Nazi Party newspaper is Völkischer Beobachter, V-O with an umlaut, L-K-I-S-C-H-E-R-B-E-O-B-A-C-H-T-E-R, rather than V-O-E-L-K-I-S-C.